There's an absurd anomaly occupying my hometown. The FBI is covering it up until they've determined it's appropriate to release information about the anomaly and their investigation of it to the public. We can't access any social media or texting app, but we can still use search engines. They're everywhere. Cups, plates, screens, any new plastic or metal. Mouths with teeth, along with veins with a mind of their own. I've thrown away all my cups, most of my plates, and most of my electronics. I checked my car. Those little veins were popping out of the exhaust pipe. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I'm getting chills just thinking about it, and a list I randomly found one day, a list of dates, surnames, and names of towns, buildings, etc. written in 1528 predicted it. If I knew any better, I would have skipped town for the day, but I didn't. I wanted to know who wrote that list, and where this anomaly was coming from, but I didn't know where to start. As I thought about my next steps, there was a knock at my front door. Answering it, I saw a woman who looked to be in her 30s. She looked panicked. Behind her, the fog was still as thick as it was when I first saw it. "There's something going down at the library," she said, breathing heavily. "What's this going to be?" I decided to go see what was up. The fog was still thick, so I navigated slowly. Once I arrived at the library, bright emergency lights flashed through the fog. There were voices and silhouettes, but I couldn't make much out with everybody speaking at once, and the fog. Then somebody began to shout over all the noise. "Back away. This is the epicenter of a matter-shifting anomaly. Get back." There was no use trying to see what was going on in there. I asked a man nearby what the hell was going on. He told me he didn't know, but then he told me he was told somebody had a recording of something going down on the basement floor. I was tempted to know what it was. The temptation overran any fear of what it might be, as I couldn't be afraid of something I just assumed. I asked other nearby bystanders about the supposed recording, anticipating a good answer. I had to have asked 15 people about the footage before a man who looked to be in his 20s claimed he had it. I asked him if I could watch it, explaining to him it's important people know what's going on. He took out his phone, navigated to the camera app, then held the phone up to my face. The cameraman was indeed in the basement floor of the library, filming a TV that was making a chilling screeching noise, topped off by repeated buzzing. The cameraman panned to a child who was backing away, with a frightened look on their face, then they panned back to the TV. Cracking and booming came from somewhere behind the cameraman, who turned around to film it. The floor had a noticeable crack in it. The cameraman walked closer, but stopped feet away from it as it began to widen. The legs of one of the computer desks fell in, causing the computers to slide under the desk in front of it. It didn't matter anyway, because the computer screens each had mouse too. It was a light gray void with no noticeable walls. It just went on for infinity. As the cameraman filmed the void, the faintest irregular shapes could be seen squirming around. They got easier to make out as the seconds went by. As they got closer, you could see the detail. Dark gray and black squirming orifices that combined, then detached, with one another. It was chilling to the absolute fullest. I wanted to look away, but it was important to know what was going on, right? As the thing peered its head into the room, the camera operator turned to the stairs and sprinted to the ground floor. There wasn't a person in sight. The camera operator bolted outside into the fog. The camera app crashed, then a fierce buzzing noise came from the phone speakers. "Take the card out," I said. The guy pried his phone open. Exposed veins detached from the back cover. The man looked inside and gave a look of disgust. He pulled the card out and dropped his phone onto the ground. With a look of determination, he stomped the phone until it had cracked and splintered. This town had gone under so fast, it was beyond my understanding. Being here was like being in a Lovecraft novel at this point. The only thing missing was a deranged cult that worshipped the sphere. I wasn't going to stick around for such horror, so I desperately walked along the sidewalk, through the fog, until reaching what I assumed was the forest based on how much I knew the area. I walked at a slow pace, trying to control my breaths. I was determined to get away from the town of horror, but had to watch out for tree trunks on my way through the densely foggy forest. The forest was a better option than walking along the sidewalk only to eventually be turned back by people in suits. I was hoping my hopes of escape weren't blind, but I knew it would make sense if agents were patrolling some area of the forest. Either way, I needed to take a chance for survival. As I continued walking through the thick forest of bushes and trees, I took note of anything I could hear. It sounded as if every bird in the world was chirping at the same time. I heard footsteps cracking branches towards me. Were these agents? Seconds later, I got my answer. "Hey," a male voice called out. "You an agent?" "No, I'm trying to get out of this godforsaken place," I said, almost losing my breath. "Okay, good," he said, calmly. "We just need to speak to you." The sounds of their footsteps got louder. Faster. Before I could process anything, a man knocked me in the head with a heavy object. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was enough to knock me out. I awoke some time later, laying in some bushes. The fog was still thick, there was a sore spot on my neck, and my head hurt nonetheless. I picked myself up, confused, realizing it was getting dark. I didn't want to run into those madmen again, so I went back, jumping at every noise, just determined to get home and relax. On my way home, I stopped at the police station to report the madmen. They told me they'd keep an eye out for them. Hopefully the fog wasn't too thick for that. When was this shit going to end? Following along the sidewalk, gunshots rang out in the distance. Were people shooting at the mouthy creatures? Or was that round squirmy abomination attacking the town? I picked up my pace, not knowing what was happening, but hoping for my dear life the madmen weren't taking over or some crazy shit. Along the way, I stepped on something soft. Chills ran down my spine. Looking back, I could see a faint mouth-shaped silhouette. I shuddered. EW. I kept walking. A minute later, I saw another one of them. I stopped, considering stepping around the creature. Instead, I stepped up to it and stomped on it again and again until I was sure it was dead. It was chilling to make contact with it, but it was good to literally stomp out my fear. Once I was back home, I checked every room for mouth creatures. To my pleasure, there were none. I looked at the bottom of my shoe and saw a purple ooze had stained it. I took my shoes off and put on my now emergency shoes. I tucked my pants into my socks and my shirt into my pants in case any of the little creatures crawled onto me. Sometime that night I heard what sounded like somebody sliding a sheet of paper under my door. I went up to the door and found just that. Curious about it, I picked it up to read it. "You're being followed by a dangerous fringe group. Meet me at XXXXX Broad St tomorrow at noon. Those madmen wanted something. Once they found out I wasn't an agent, they knocked me out and did something with my neck, which was still sore. I was glad somebody was looking to deter the men, but damn it, what did they do with my neck?" The next day, leading up to my walk to the other side of town, I used an old phone my neatbore had just lent me to Google the history of the town in hopes of finding a lead on who may have written the list of dates and names. I found out the first settlers were around in the 1700s. But the paper was written in the 1500s, so it must have been brought here all that time ago. I wish I could just understand what was written on the first 2 pages. I was pessimistic about translating the old text until I actually found out what language the text was in. After some Google foo, I found out the language was Old English. Before I could start copy-paste translating the old text, The phone I was using started buzzing like crazy, which made me jump. I went cold. No. Damn it. Determined, I walked straight into the kitchen. This little shit wasn't going to get away. I pulled the back of the phone until it popped off, then I set both pieces in the sink. Veins were growing around the battery. I took the card out, then I plugged the sink and turned the water on hot. Now I have 2 cards. Great. During my mini fit, the front door's knob began to shake, like somebody was trying to get in. I walked up to the door and looked through the tiny peephole. A woman my height, who very mysteriously looked like she was my twin, was standing on my doorstep. I opened the door, but before I could ask her if she needed something, she gave me a look of shock and confusion. As much as I was feeling in her presence. After a confusing conversation about who really lived at my house, the woman took out her ID and held it up to my face. It was an exact copy of mine. When I showed her mine, she too adopted a look of shock on her face. We exchanged a confused, awkward silence for a minute until the seemingly mirrored version of me started asking me personal questions. "If you're me, what are my siblings' names?" she asked. "If you're me, you don't have any," I said. We went back and forth until she asked Maya a rather specific question about a dog. She explained she named the dog Camila, and that something happened to it. Something she only ever told her veterinarian. It's quite personal, as I had been through the exact same thing with a dog bearing the same name. I'll just point out that I answered it correctly. 100%. I even brought up what breed the dog was and a detail she missed about its death. She adopted a look of pure surprise, looking as amazed as I felt, and I felt amazed as hell. We stared awkwardly at each other for a minute until I broke the silence. "Well, how did you get here?" I asked. "I got lost in the fog," she said. "I accidentally walked into trees and cars until I fell into this endless gray void. I saw a hole and didn't know where I was until some agents told me to turn back." I told her about the footage I saw of a freakish creature poking up from a gray void. As I described the thing, her expression dropped. "I saw that horrible thing," she said, shaking. "I can't get it out of my head. It was just a floating ball of... I don't even know." It was interesting to get a full description of the thing, but I still couldn't wrap my mind around it. It could hover, it looked like it was alive, as chilling as it is to type that. I led my other self inside. We both sat on the couch, amazed at whatever was happening between us. She pulled out a phone. I explained to her what happened to the 2 phones I had. She told me she found hers on the side of the road. She tapped an app that had a purple sphere as a logo. It brought her to an error screen. "Oh God," she said. "Now Nova isn't working." "Nova?" I asked. I had never heard of Nova before. My first thought was that it was just some app I've never heard of. "You don't know it?" she asked. "It's like the most well-known search engine." "That's Google though," I said. She gave me a look of confusion. Maybe she was from a reality where Google never existed. I told her to download Google. Once she did, she had the hugest look of bewilderment as she opened the app and it brought her to the search page. "I never heard of this before," she said. "I mean, if that's different for you, I wonder what else is, and why that gut-tearing thing opened up portals to different realities," I said, amazed that that was even possible. I always thought it was a theory with no evidence to prove or disprove. But here we are. She explained the situation with the fog and freaky mouths had happened in her reality, which I nodded my head to, signaling it was happening here too, not that it wasn't obvious. Then she started naming historical events like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Challenger explosion, and 9/11, which I confirmed had happened here too. She told me she was relieved this reality wasn't so different from her own. At around 11:30 a.m., I explained to her the sheet of paper I got from a mysterious person. She told me she got the same letter. We both decided to get ready for the half-hour walk. As we got ready, I told her I was glad she didn't come from a reality where she was a mean person. Who knows what would be going down if she was a terrible version of me. When we got to the address, I knocked on the door. Opening it was a man in black clothing. He introduced himself as Grayson, then let us in right away. My other self and I found a spot to sit and got comfortable. The man paced around for a couple seconds as we waited for him to give us whatever info he wanted to give us. Okay, he sighed. I might as well tell you. I was less sure that I wanted to tell you, because you're regular people, but you're both being followed by them, so here it goes. There's something rising up, so to speak. To focus on this specific case, there's a creature, an abomination is a better way to put it, rising up from under this town, and it's all thanks to a group of psychotic people. I could only think of the creature I saw in the library footage. Is it a sphere with squirming life forms on it? Grayson's eyes widened. Yes, he said. You came in contact with it? Well, no, I said. I told him about the video from earlier. As I finished explaining what I saw, he sighed in relief. My other self told him she saw it while falling through the void she talked about earlier. You didn't touch it, did you? Grayson asked, resting his hand on his right pocket. No, said my other self. I wasn't close enough. Grayson sighed in relief, then continued explaining. There's no use trying to deeply explain that sphere of abomination. It exists the way it does for a reason we can't know, but there are a couple of things we do know about it, at least. Wherever it goes, those mouth creatures we've been seeing are a result of its presence. There's a group that summoned the sphere through technology not seen by anybody else in this reality. This was interesting, but chilling to hear at the same time. He continued to explain. We're positive they got this technology from an alternate reality, but we don't know which one, and we don't know how they gained the ability to hop realities. So not only was reality hopping a thing, but there were realities where unseen technology existed and could be used as an upper hand? What I was hearing gave me a sinking feeling, especially with how professional and convincing the tone of Grayson's voice was. Why do they want to summon that? My other self asked, visibly recoiling as she spoke of the sphere. It's being used as a rope, Grayson said, gesturing as if he was holding an actual rope. It's connecting one reality to the other, but telepathically. You are an alternate version of this reality's you. The fact you even found that slip is a sign another connection was made. But it doesn't stop there. It hasn't started yet, but there's an effort from a cult to pull a certain reality closer to this one. A loud knock was heard at the door. We can hear you in there, said a male voice in an unusually soft tone. We don't want a war, we just want the subjects. Grayson's eyes widened. He leaned towards me and whispered into my ear. They're not going to leave us alone. Get into the safe room in the basement. The password is 3-8-2-1. As Grayson leaned towards the ear of my other self, I got up and ran to a nearby open door with stairs leading downward. I switched the light on, spotting the metal door, along with a keypad to the right of it. As I jogged down the stairs, I looked back and saw my other self sprinting towards the stairs. There was another bang at the door. That time much louder. A pit was forming in my gut, especially as it dawned on me this anomaly is in town because some crazy people wanted to connect a certain reality to this one. But what reality? Hopefully I'll find out at some point. What I also want to know is what Grayson's plan was, if he had one. There's no way he brought us here for no reason. But now, the maniacs are here. That sheet of paper, the one with the dates. I wish it were more precise. Once I reached the keypad, I punched the password in. The text on the lock changed, telling us the door was unlocked. I pulled the handle, successfully opening the door, then stepped into the safe room. I turned around to make sure my other self was in the room. She was. At the height of my adrenaline, I grabbed the handle and slammed the door shut, then I re-entered the password on the interior padlock. Looking around, I saw a security center at the back of the room, multiple bags, a fridge, and a portable toilet. The security center had 3 screens, with the one on the left being cracked, with purple liquid dripping out of a small hole. I stepped up to the buttons and hit what I could only assume was the power button. A security feed from the living room began broadcasting from the center screen, while a security feed from the kitchen began broadcasting from the screen to the right. In the living room, Grayson was standing at his front door, gesturing like he was talking to somebody. He had to have been talking, but I couldn't hear anything. The feed was muted. Looking over all of the buttons on the dashboard, I found what looked to be a volume button. It refused to work when pressing it. Other me began to speak in a shaky tone, talking about our location. I turned my head to see she was talking on the phone. She said thanks and hung up, then told me she had just called the police. Good. It'll be interesting to see how that goes down. The front door was pushed right off its hinges, crashing to the carpeted floor. 4 pale people, 2 men and 2 women, stepped inside, aiming chrome-plated rifles up to the man's head. Grayson stood back, but kept his hands to his sides. He pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket and held it up in front of the gunman. Still, we couldn't hear what was going on at all. Grayson began gesturing again, but then the 3 gunmen shot him in the chest. A pink mist spewed out of his upper back, and he tumbled to the ground, holding his chest tightly. Worst of all, in his defeat, he laid on his back, so we both saw the life drain from his helpless eyes. Chilling all around. I exchanged looks with my other self, who looked just as terrified as I felt inside. I don't know what's about to happen next. These maniacs want something from my other self and I, so I'm hoping they don't kill us. As for why they need us, I haven't figured that out yet. But when I do, I hope I don't get hurt by them, their nightmarish floating ball, or the dread-inducing mouth creatures triggered by it.